1. 9. 15-19, 24. 11. 27. Compare EC2. 3-6, 9. The temple, his outstanding construction work, with its associated courtyards, was built on Mount Moriah on the eastern ridge, but end of the city of David, evidently in the area of the present-day Dome of the Rock. 2ch3. 1. 1 Chi 6. 37, 38. 7. 12 other major buildings nearby were Solomon's own house or palace, the cedarwood house of the Forest of Lebanon, the Porch of Pillars, and the judicial porch of the throne. 1 Chi 7. 1-8 This building complex was apparently situated east of the temple on the gradual slope running down toward the city of David. Map, Volume 1, p. 752. Picture, Volume 1, p. 748. Divided Kingdom 997-607 BCE. Jeroboam's rebellion split the nation into two kingdoms, and Jerusalem was left as the capital of two tribes, Benjamin and Judah, under Solomon's son Rehoboam. Levites and priests also moved to the city where Jehovah's name rested, thereby strengthening Rehoboam's kingship. 2ch 11. 1-17 Jerusalem was now no longer at the geographic center of the kingdom, being only a few miles from the border of the hostile northern 10-tribe kingdom. Within 5 years of Solomon's death, the city experienced the first of a number of invasions. King Otextoi acute Muritra Longo, Jerusalem 43 a second time by an Arab Philistine combine, this despite the strong defense walls. 2ch 21. 12-17 In the next century the deflection from the righteous course by King Jehoash resulted in Syrian forces beginning to invade Judah and Jerusalem, the context implying that they were successful in entering the city. 2ch 24. 20-25 During Amaziah's apostasy the northern kingdom of Israel invaded Judah, and broke down about 178 meters 584 feet of the vital northern wall between the corner gate in the NW corner and the Ephraim gate to the E of the corner gate. 2ch 25. 22-24 It is possible that, at some point prior to this, the city had expanded across the central valley onto the western ridge. King Uzziah 829-778 BCE made notable additions to the city's defenses, fortifying the NW corner gate and the valley gate at this corner with towers, as well as a tower at the buttress the angle, RS, JB. The turning, JP, apparently some part of the eastern wall not far from the royal buildings, either those of David or of Solomon. 2ch 26. 9. Eni 3. 24, 25 Uzziah also equipped the towers and corners with engines of war, perhaps mechanical catapults for shooting arrows and large stones. 2ch 26. 14, 15 His son Jotham continued the building program. 2ch 27. 3, 4. Faithful King Hezekiah, ruling after his father, the apostate Ahaz, did cleansing and repair work in the temple area and arranged a great Passover celebration that drew worshippers to Jerusalem from all over the land, the northern kingdom included. 2ch 29. 1-5, 18, 19. 30. 1, 10-26 This stimulus for true worship, however, was soon followed by attack from pagan quarters, mockers of the true God whose name rested on Jerusalem. In 732 BCE 8 years after Assyria's conquest of the northern kingdom of Israel, Assyrian king Sennacherib made a Scythia-like sweep through Palestine, diverting some troops to threaten Jerusalem. 2ch 32. 1, 9 Hezekiah had readied the city for a siege. He stopped up the water sources outside the city to hide them and make things difficult for the enemy, strengthened the walls, and fortified them. 2ch 32. 2-5, 27-30 It would seem that the conduit for bringing water into the city from the spring of Gihon was already constructed at this time, possibly being a peacetime project. 2 Chi 20. 20. 2ch 32. 30th, as believed, it was the conduit that includes the tunnel cut through the side of the Kidron Valley with its termination at the pool of Siloam in the Doropian Valley, then it was no minor project to be completed in a few days. See Archaeology Palestine and Syria. Gihon no. 2. At any rate, the city's strength lay not in its defensive systems and supplies, but in the protective power of Jehovah God, who said, "And I shall certainly defend this city to save it for my own sake, and for the sake of David my servant." 2 Kai 19. 32-34 The miraculous destruction of 185,000 Assyrian troops sent Sennacherib scurrying back to Assyria. 2 Kai 19. 35-36 When the campaign account was recorded in the Assyrian annals, it boasted of Sennacherib's shutting Hezekiah up inside Jerusalem like a bird in a cage, but it made no claim of capturing the city. See Sennacherib. The reign of Manasseh 716-662 BCE brought further wall construction along the Kidron Valley. It also saw the nation drift farther from true worship. 2 Ch 33. 1-9-14 His grandson Josiah temporarily reversed this decline, and during his rule the valley of Hinnom, used by idolatrous persons for vile ceremonies, was made unfit for worship, likely desecrated by being made into a city garbage dump. 2 Kai 23. 10. 2 Ch 33. 6 The gate of the ash heaps apparently opened out onto this valley. Eni 3. 13, 14. See Gehenna. Hinnom, Valley of. During Josiah's time the second quarter the new town, JB of the city receives initial mention. 2 Kai 22. 14. 2 Ch 34. 22 This second quarter is generally understood to be the section of the city O Textoi Acute Miritra Longo, Jerusalem 44 Desolation and Restoration. The city walls were breached on Tammuz 9, 607 BCE. A month later, on Ab 10, Nebuchadnezzar's agent, Nebuzaradan, entered the conquered city and began demolition work, burning the temple and other buildings and proceeding to pull down the city walls. Jerusalem's king and most of her people were exiled to Babylon and her treasures were carried away as plunder. 2 Kai 25. 7-17. 2 Ch 36. 17-20. J 52. 12-20. Picture, Volume 2, p. 326. The statement by archaeologist Konda that the history of the ruined city remains a blank until Cyrus is true not only of Jerusalem, but also of the entire realm of the kingdom of Judah. Unlike the Assyrians, the Babylonian king moved no replacement peoples into the conquered region. A period of 70 years of desolation set in, even as prophesied. J 25. 11. 2 Ch 36. 21. In the first year evidently as ruler over Babylon of Cyrus the Persian 538 BCE the royal decree went forth freeing the exiled Jews to go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and rebuild the house of Jehovah the God of Israel. As 1. 1-4 The people who made the long trip to Jerusalem, carrying temple treasures with them, included 42,360 Israelites, besides slaves and professional singers. They arrived in time to celebrate the Festival of Booths in Tishri September-October 537 BCE as 2. 64, 65. 3. 1-4 Temple rebuilding got underway under Governor Zerubbabel's direction and, after serious interference and the infiltration of some apathy among the returned Jews, was finally completed by March of 515 BCE. More exiles returned with priest scribe Ezra in 468 BCE bringing additional things to beautify the house of Jehovah, which is in Jerusalem as 7. 27. This by authorization of King Artaxerxes Longimanus. The treasures brought by them were evidently worth more than $43,000-000. Ezra 8. 25-27. About a century and a half after Nebuchadnezzar's conquest, the walls and gates of the city were still broken down. Nehemiah obtained permission from Artaxerxes to go to Jerusalem and remedy this situation. Ne 2. 1-8 The account that follows of Nehemiah's nighttime survey and of his apportioning the construction work to different family groups is a major source of information about the layout of the city at that time, especially of its gates. Ne 2. 11-15. 3. 1-32. Seagate, Gateway. This rebuilding was in fulfillment of Daniel's prophecy and established the year that marked the start of the 70 prophetic weeks involving the coming of the Messiah. Dar 9. 24-27. Despite harassment, in the short space of 52 days, in the year 455 BCE they ringed Jerusalem with a wall and gates. Ne 4. 1-23. 6. 15. 7. 1. C. 70 weeks. The going forth of the word. Jerusalem was now wide and great, but there were few people inside it. Ne 7. 4. Following the public reading of scriptures and celebrations in the public square that was before the water gate on the east side of the city. Ne 3. 26. 8. 1-18. Arrangements were made to build up the city's population by bringing in one Israelite out of every 10 to dwell there. This was done by casting lots, but additionally there were evidently volunteers. Ne 11. 1. 2. A spiritual cleansing work was done to put the city's population on a sound foundation as regards true worship. Ne 12. 47. 13. 3. Nehemiah's governorship lasted 12 years or more and embraced a trip to the Persian king's court. Upon his return to Jerusalem, he found need for further cleansing. Ne 13. 4-31. With the vigorous rooting out of apostasy he effected, the record of the Hebrew scriptures closes, sometime after the year 443 BCE Hellenic and Maccabean control. The changeover from Medo-Persian to Greek control came in 332 BCE when Alexander the Great marched through Judah. The Greek historians make no mention of Alexander's entry into Jerusalem. Yet the city did come under Greek dominion, and it is reasonable o textoi acute miritra longo. Jerusalem 45 rededicated Jehovah's altar to true worship on the anniversary of its profanation, Chislev 25, 165 BCE 1 Maccabees 4. 52-54. 2 Maccabees 10. 5. Compare Joe 10. 22. The war against the Seleucid rulers had not ended. The Jews appealed to Rome for help, and thus a new power came on the Jerusalem scene in about 160 BCE 1 Maccabees 8. 17. 18. Now Jerusalem began to come under the influence of the expanding Roman Empire. About 142 BCE Simon Maccabeus was able to make Jerusalem the capital of a region ostensibly free from subservience to or taxation by Gentile nations. Aristobulus I, Jerusalem's high priest, even assumed the title of king in 104 BCE. He was not, however, of the Davidic line. Jerusalem was no city of peace during this period. Internal quarrels, fired by selfish ambitions and worsened by rival religious factions. Sadducees, Pharisees, Zealots, and others gravely weakened the city. A violent quarrel between Aristobulus II and his brother Hyrcanus resulted in Rome's being called on to arbitrate the dispute. Under General Pompey, Roman forces besieged Jerusalem in 63 BCE for 3 months in order to enter the city and settle the dispute. 12,000 Jews reportedly died, many at the hands of fellow Israelites. It is in Josephus' account of Pompey's conquest that the archway across the Tyropian Valley is first mentioned. It served as a link between the eastern and western halves of the city and gave those on the western half direct access to the temple area. The Idumean Antipater II was now installed as Roman governor for Judea, a Maccabean being left as high priest and local ethnarch in Jerusalem. Later, Antipater's son Herod the Great was appointed by Rome as king over Judea. He did not get control of Jerusalem until 37 or 36 BCE, from which date his rule effectively began. Under Herod the Great, Herod's rule was marked by an ambitious building program, and the city enjoyed considerable prosperity. A theatre, gymnasium, and hippodrome picture, Volume 2, p. 535, as well as other public buildings, were added. Herod also built a well-fortified royal palace picture, Volume 2, p. 538, evidently on the W side of the city S of the present-day Jaffa Gate, where archaeologists believe they have found the foundation of one of the towers. Another fortress, the Tower of Antonia, lay near the temple and was connected with it by a passageway. Picture, Volume 2, p. 535. Jewish Antiquities, 15, 424-11. 7. The Roman garrison could thus gain quick access to the temple area, as likely occurred when soldiers rescued Paul from a mob there. Act 21. 31, 32. Herod's greatest work, however, was the reconstruction of the temple and its building complex. Beginning in his 18th year Jewish Antiquities, 380-11, the Holy House itself was completed in a year and a half, but the work on the adjoining buildings and courtyards went on long after his death. Joe 2. 20 The total area encompassed was about double that of the previous temple area. Part of the wall of the temple courtyard apparently still stands, known today as the Western Wall, or the Wailing Wall. Archaeologists date the lower courses of huge 0.9 m high 3 feet blocks as from Herod's construction. From 2 BCE to 70 CE the Christian Greek scriptures now carry forward the description of events involving Jerusalem. Jesus' birth took place, not at Jerusalem, but at nearby Bethlehem, David's city. Luke 2. 10:11 Nevertheless, the astrologers' later report about the birth of the King of the Jews caused Herod and all Jerusalem along with him to become agitated. Mount 2. 1-3 Shortly after issuing his infamous decree ordering the killing of Bethlehem's babes, Herod died, evidently in the year 1 BCE. See Herod number 1. His son Archelaus inherited rulership over Jerusalem and Judea as well as other areas. Rome later removed Archelaus for misdemeanors. Thereafter governors who owe textoi acute miritra longo, Jerusalem 46 city are mentioned in connection with his ministry. The Pool of Bethesda with its 5 colonnades Joe 5. 2 is thought to be the one that was unearthed just end of the temple area. See Bethesda. The 1st century Pool of Siloam may well be a pool recently found in the lowest part of the Doropian Valley, which receives its water from the spring of Gihon through a channel. Joe 9. 11. Picture, Volume 2, p. 950. It is with regard to Jesus' final visit to Jerusalem that a more detailed picture is given. Map, Volume 2, p. 742. Pictures, Volume 2, p. 743. 6 days prior to the Passover festival of 33 CE Jesus came to Bethany, on the eastern side of the Mount of Olives. The next day, Nisan 9, as Jehovah's anointed king, he approached the capital city, mounted on the colt of an ass, in fulfillment of the prophecy of Zechariah 9. 9. Mount 21. 1-9 Coming down the Mount of Olives, he paused to view the city and wept over it, graphically foretelling the coming siege and desolation it would undergo. Luke 19. 37-44 Upon his entering the city, likely through a gate in the eastern wall, the whole city was set in commotion, for news would spread quickly throughout the relatively small area. Mount 21. 10. During the remaining time, in which he spent the days in Jerusalem and the nights in Bethany. Luke 21. 37-38, Jesus cleansed the temple area of commercialists. Mount 21. 12-13, as he had done some 3 years earlier. Joe 2. 13-16 On Nisan 11 he was with 4 of his disciples on the Mount of Olives, from which the city and its temple could be viewed, when he gave his great prophecy regarding Jerusalem's coming destruction and the conclusion of the system of things, as well as of his presence. Mount 24. Mr. 13. Luke 21 On Nisan 13 Peter and John arranged for the Passover meal in an upper room in Jerusalem where, that evening the start of Nisan 14, Jesus celebrated the meal with his apostles. After his discussion with them, they left the city, crossed the winter torrent of Kidron, and climbed the slopes of the Mount of Olives to the garden called Gethsemane. Mount 26. 36. Luke 22. 39. Joe 18. 1-2 Gethsemane means oil press, and olive trees of great age are yet to be found on the slope. But the exact location of the garden is today a matter of conjecture. See Gethsemane. Arrested that night, Jesus was led back into Jerusalem to priests Annas and Caiaphas and to the Sanhedrin hall for trial. Mount 26. 57. 27. 1. Joe 18. 13-27 From there, at dawn, he was taken to Pilate at the governor's palace. Mount 27. 2. Mr. 15. 1. 16 And then to Herod Antipas, who was also in Jerusalem at that time. Luke 23. 6, 7 Finally, he was returned to Pilate for final judgment at the stone pavement, called Gabba middle dot in Hebrew. Lu 23. 11. Jo 19. 13. See stone pavement. Golgotha, meaning skull place, was the site of Jesus' impalement. Mount 27. 33-35. Lu 23. 33. Though it obviously lay outside the city walls, probably toward the end, the site cannot now be identified with certainty. See Golgotha. The same is true of the site of Jesus' burial. Pictures, Volume 2, p. 948. The potter's field to bury strangers, purchased with the bribe money Judas threw back to the priests. Mount 27. 5-7, is traditionally identified with the site on the east side of the Hinnom Valley near its junction with the Kidron. Many tombs are found in this area. See Akuldama. During the apostolic period. Following his resurrection, Jesus gave orders to his disciples not to leave Jerusalem at that time. Lu 24. 49. Act 1. For this was to be the starting point for preaching repentance for forgiveness of sins on the basis of Christ's name. Lu 24. 46-48. 10 days after his ascension to heaven, the disciples, gathered together in an upper room, received the anointing by Holy Spirit. Act 1. 13, 14. 2. 1-4. Jerusalem was crowded with Jews and proselytes from all parts of the Roman Empire, in attendance at the festival of Pentecost. The witnessing o textui acute miritra longo. Jerusalem 47. Later matters were settled. Act 11. 1-4, 18. 15. 1, 2, 22-29. G2. 1, 2. Jesus had called Jerusalem the killer of the prophets and stoner of those sent forth to her. Mount 23. 37. Compare VSS 34-36. Though many of her citizens showed faith in God's Son, the city as a whole continued to follow the pattern of the past. For this, her house was abandoned to her. Mount 23. 38. In 66 CE a Jewish revolt brought Roman forces under Stius Gallus to the city, surrounding it and making a thrust right up to the temple walls. Suddenly Stius Gallus withdrew for no apparent reason. This allowed Christians to put into action Jesus' instructions. Then let those in Judea begin fleeing to the mountains, and let those in the midst of Jerusalem withdraw, and let those in the country places not enter into her. Lu 21. 20-22. Eusebius, in his Ecclesiastical History 3, v. 3, states that the Christians fled from Jerusalem and the whole land of Judea to a city of Perea that was called Pella. Jerusalem's relief as a result of the Roman withdrawal was short-lived, as it had been when the Babylonians temporarily withdrew to deal with the Egyptians near the end of King Zedekiah's reign. Under General Titus the Roman forces returned in 70 CE in increased numbers, and laid siege to the city, now crowded with Passover celebrants. Siege banks were thrown up by the Romans, and a continuous wall or fence was erected around the entire city to prevent escape by day or night. This, too, fulfilled Jesus' prophecy. Lu 19. 43. Within the city rival factions quarreled and fought, much of the food supply was destroyed, and those caught attempting to leave the city were slain as traitors. Josephus, the source of this information, relates that in time the famine became so grave that the people were reduced to eating wisps of hay and leather, even their own children. Compare La 2. 11, 12, 19, 20. De 28. 56, 57. Titus' offers of peace were consistently rejected by the stubborn city leaders. Eventually the walls were systematically breached by the Romans, and their troops invaded the city. Picture, Volume 2, p. 752. Despite orders to the contrary, the temple was burned and gutted. According to Josephus, this took place on the anniversary of Nebuchadnezzar's destruction of the first temple centuries earlier. His account also states that the repository of the archives, housing the genealogical records of tribal and family descent and inheritance rights, was put to the fire. The Jewish War, 6, 250, 251 4, 5. 2, 426-428 17, 6. 6, 354-6, 3 Thus, the legal means for establishing the lineage of members of the Messianic tribe of Judah and the priestly tribe of Levi came to an end. In just 4 months and 25 days, from April the 3rd to August the 30th, 70 CE the conquest had been effected. Thus, the tribulation, though intense, was remarkably short. The unreasoning attitude and actions of the Jews within the city doubtless Jerusalem and vicinity 5 kilometers Jerusalem Bethlehem Baal Perazim Bethbaj Betanina Banathoth Gibeah Jebarama Gibeah Nemayas Kiriath Jearim Michmash Mizpah Upper Beth Horon Lower Beth Horon I Bethel Jerusalem 48 contributed to this shortness. Though Josephus puts the number of dead at 1,100,000, there were survivors. 97,000 captives were taken, many of whom were sent as slaves to Egypt or were killed by sword or beasts in the theatres of the Roman provinces. This, too, fulfilled divine prophecy. The 28. 68. The entire city was demolished, with only the towers of Herod's palace and a portion of the western wall left standing as evidence to later generations of the defensive strength that had availed nothing. Josephus remarks that, apart from these remnants, the rest of the wall encompassing the city was so completely leveled to the ground as to leave future visitors to the spot no ground for believing that it had ever been inhabited. The Jewish War, 7:3a, 1 A relief on the Arch of Titus in Rome depicts Roman soldiers carrying off sacred vessels of the ruined temple. Compare Mount 24. 2. Picture, Volume 2, p. 752. Later periods. Jerusalem remained virtually desolate until about 130 CE, when Emperor Hadrian ordered the building of a new city, named Aelia Capitolina. This provoked a Jewish revolt by Bar Kokhba 132-135 CE, which succeeded for a time but was then crushed. Jews were not allowed in the Roman-built city for nearly 2 centuries. In the 4th century, Constantine the Great's mother Helena visited Jerusalem and began the identification of the many so-called holy sites and shrines. Later the Muslims captured the city. Today there are 2 Islamic structures on the Temple Mount. Late in the 7th century Caliph Abd al-Malik ibn Marwan built the Dome of the Rock on or near the temple site. Although also called a mosque, it is in reality a shrine. South of the Dome of the Rock is the Al-Aqsa Mosque, first constructed in the 8th century, but largely rebuilt in the 11th century. For further information concerning geographic locations related to Jerusalem, see such articles as Unrogil, Kidron, Torrent Valley of Mach, Olives, Mount of Ophel, Temple, and Zion. The city's significance. Jerusalem was far more than the capital of an earthly nation. It was the only city in all the earth upon which Jehovah God placed his name. 1K11. 36 After the Ark of the Covenant, associated with God's presence, was transferred there, and even more so when the temple sanctuary, or house of God, was constructed there, Jerusalem became Jehovah's figurative residence, his resting place. PS 78. 68, 69. 132. 13, 14. 135. 21. Compare 2-7. 1-7, 12, 13. Because the kings of the Davidic line were God's anointed, sitting upon Jehovah's throne 1 Ch 29. 23. PS 122. 3-5, Jerusalem itself was also called the throne of Jehovah. And those tribes or nations turning to it in recognition of God's sovereignty were, in effect, being congregated to the name of Jehovah. J 3. 17. PS 122. 1-4. Issa 27. 13. Those hostile to or fighting against Jerusalem were, in actuality, opposing the expression of God's sovereignty. This was certain to occur, in view of the prophetic statement of Genesis 3. 15. Jerusalem therefore represented the seat of the divinely constituted government or typical kingdom of God. From it went forth God's law, his word, and his blessing. Mach 4. 2. PS 128. 5. Those working for Jerusalem's peace and its good were therefore working for the success of God's righteous purpose, the prospering of his will. PS 122. 6-9 Though situated among Judah's mountains and doubtless of impressive appearance, Jerusalem's true loftiness and beauty came from the way in which Jehovah God had honored and glorified it, that it might serve as a crown of beauty for him. PS 48. 1-3, 11-14. 50. 2. Issa 62. 1-7. Since Jehovah's praise and his will are affected primarily by his intelligent creatures, it was not bronze predominated during the Jewish war against Rome, proclaiming freedom of Zion. Bronze Sestosius commemorating Roman conquest of Otextoi acute Muritra Longo. Jeshaiah 49 The buildings forming the city that determined his continued use of the city, but the people in it, rulers and ruled, priests and people. PS 102. 18-22. Issa 26. 1, 2 All these were faithful, honoring Jehovah's name by their words and life course. He blessed and defended Jerusalem. PS 125. 1, 2. Issa 31. 4, 5 Jehovah's disfavor soon came upon the people and their kings, because of the apostate course the majority followed. For this reason Jehovah declared his purpose to reject the city that had borne his name. 2 Kai 21. 12-15. 23. 27 He would remove support and stay from the city, resulting in its becoming filled with tyranny, with juvenile delinquency, with disrespect for men in honorable positions. Jerusalem would suffer abasement and severe humiliation. Issa 3. 1-8, 16-26 Even though Jehovah God restored the city 70 years after permitting its destruction by Babylon, making it again beautiful as the joyful center of true worship in the earth. Issa 52. 1-9. 65. 17-19, the people and their leaders reverted to their apostate course once more. Jehovah preserved the city until the sending of his Son to earth. It had to be there for the messianic prophecies to be fulfilled. Issa 28. 16. 52. 7. Zech 9. 9 Israel's apostate course was climaxed in the impalement of the Messiah, Jesus Christ. Compare Mount 21. 33-41. Taking place as it did at Jerusalem, instigated by the nation's leaders with popular support, this made certain God's complete and irreversible rejection of the city as representing him and bearing his name. Compare Mount 16. 21. Luke 13. 33-35. Neither Jesus nor his apostles foretold any restoration by God of earthly Jerusalem and its temple to come after the city's divinely decreed destruction, which occurred in 70 CE, yet the name Jerusalem continued to be used as symbolic of something greater than the earthly city. The Apostle Paul, by divine inspiration, revealed that there is a Jerusalem above, which he speaks of as the mother of anointed Christians. 4. 25. 26 This places the Jerusalem above in the position of a wife to Jehovah God, a great Father and life-giver. When earthly Jerusalem was used as the chief city of God's chosen nation, it, too, was spoken of as a woman, married to God, being tied to him by holy bonds in a covenant relationship. Issa 51. 17, 21, 22. 54. 1, 5. 60. 1, 14 It thus stood for, or was representative of, the entire congregation of God's human servants. Jerusalem above must therefore represent the entire congregation of Jehovah's loyal spirit servants. New Jerusalem. In the inspired revelation, the Apostle John records information concerning the New Jerusalem. 3. 12 In vision John sees this holy city as coming down out of heaven from God and prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. This is in relation to the vision he sees of a new heaven and a new earth. This bride was said to be the Lamb's wife. 21. 1-3, 9-27 Other apostolic writings apply the same figure to the Christian congregation of anointed ones. 2 Co 11. 2. F5. 21-32 In Revelation chapter 14 the Lamb Christ Jesus is depicted as standing on Mount Zion, a name also associated with Jerusalem. Compare 1 Pe 2. 6, and with him are 144,000 having his name and the name of his Father written on their foreheads. 14. 1-5. See New Jerusalem. Unfaithful Jerusalem. Since much that is said concerning Jerusalem in the scriptures is in condemnation of her, it is clear that only when faithful did Jerusalem symbolize the heavenly part of Jehovah's organization and, at times, the true Christian congregation, the Israel of God. G6. 16. When unfaithful, it was pictured as a prostitute and an adulterous woman. It became like the pagan Amorites and Hittites that once controlled the city. As 16. 3, 15, 30-42. As such, it could only represent apostates, those following a prostitute course of infidelity to the God whose name they claim to bear. O texto e acute miritra longo, Jeshana 50 Jeshana Jesha middle dot Nar Old Town. A place mentioned along with Mizpah as indicating the location of the stone that Samuel set up and called Ebenezer. 1-7. 12 Jeshana was one of the cities captured by Judean king Abijah 980-978 BCE from Jeroboam the king of Israel. 2ch 13. 19. It is considered to be identical with the Asan referred to by Josephus as the site of Herod the Great's victory over General Pappus. Jewish Antiquities, 14, 458-15, 12. The name Isana seems to be preserved in Burial Isana, about 8 km 5 mi of Bethel. This place has therefore been suggested as a possible identification for ancient Jeshana. Jesharela Jesh middle dot Rela. A son of Asaph listed among the musicians and singers in David's time. 1ch 25. 1, 9, 14. He is probably the same as Asherella. 1ch 25. 2. Jeshabiabji middle dot Shebi middle dot May the father continued it well. Or, possibly, Jehovah has brought the father back. The priest whose paternal house was selected by lot for the 14th course when David had the priestly services divided up. 1ch 24. 6, 13. Jeshua uprightness. The son of Caleb the son of Hezron. Of the tribe of Judah. 1ch 2. 3-5, 18. Jeshemonji middle dot Shimunde desert. 1. A wilderness area seemingly at the any end of the Dead Sea, in which area Beth Jeshimoth was perhaps located. Apparently Pisgah and P overlooked Jeshimon. New 21. 20. 23. 28. Jos 12. 1-3. 2. A region near Zip, situated end of the wilderness of Maon. It would appear that Jeshimon included part of the wilderness of Judah and lay a few miles of Hebron. In this area of naked, chalky hills, David and his men hid from King Saul. 1-23. 19, 24. 26. 1, 3. See Judah, wilderness of Jeshishai middle dot Shishai from a root meaning aged. A descendant of Gad. 1ch 5. 11, 14. Jeshua Jesh middle dot O middle dot Hayar. A Simeonite chieftain, one of those who expanded their territory at the expense of the Hamites during the days of King Hezekiah. 1ch 4. 24, 34-41. Jeshua Jeshu middle dot possibly a shortened form of Jehoshua, meaning Jehovah is salvation. 1. An Aaronic priest in David's time. The ninth of the 24 divisions of the Aaronic priesthood as arranged by David was assigned to the house of Jeshua. Probably the same house is listed among those returning with Zerubbabel from the Babylonian exile in 537 BCE. 1ch 24. 1, 11, 31. As 2. 1, 36. Ne 7. 39. 2. One of the Levites assigned to distribute the tithes and contributions in the priests' cities during the reign of King Hezekiah. 2ch 31. 15. 3. An Israelite of the family of Pahath Moab, some of whose descendants returned from the Babylonian exile with Zerubbabel. As 2. 1, 2, 6. Ne 7. 11. 4. A high priest called Joshua in Haggai and Zechariah, son of Jehozadak and grandson of Sariah. As 3. 8. Ne 12. 26. 1ch 6. 14. He was of the house of Eleazar. CS 7. 1-5 for the genealogy from Eleazar to Sariah. When Nebuchadnezzar destroyed Jerusalem, he put to death Sariah, who was high priest then, and took Jehozadak captive to Babylon. 2-25. 18-21. 1-6. 14-15 Jeshua returned from Babylon in 537 BCE with Zerubbabel and served as high priest to the restored Jewish remnant. As 2. 5. 2. Ne 7. 7. Hag 1. 1 Thus the high priestly line was preserved by Jehovah, so that Israel had the services of high priests from the restoration until the coming of the Messiah. Jeshua took the lead, along with Zerubbabel, in setting up the altar, then in rebuilding the temple, encouraged by the prophets Haggai and Zechariah. As 3. 2. 5. 1, 2 He stood by Zerubbabel in opposing the adversaries of the temple reconstruction. As 4. 1-3. Some of the older ones among the returned Israelites had seen the glory of Solomon's temple and tended to view the rebuilt temple as nothing in comparison. Haggai the prophet was sent to speak to Zerubbabel and Jeshua, telling them that the glory of the later house would become greater than the dotextoi acute miritra longo. Jesus 51:4, under the Lord, priesthood and kingship were strictly separate, and high priest Joshua never ruled as king over Israel. Zech 6. 11-13. 5. The head of a Levitical house, some of whom returned from Babylonian exile with Zerubbabel in 537 BCE as 2. 40. Ne 7. 43 If not another person by the same name, a representative of Jeshua's house signed the trustworthy arrangement entered into by the priests, princes, and people to walk in God's law. He was the son of Azaniah Ne 9. 38. 10. 1, 9 and probably the same as the Jeshua mentioned at Nehemiah 12. 8, 24. Jozabad the son of Jeshua, one of the Levites to whom Ezra turned over the silver, gold, and vessels for the house of God, was probably a member of this Jeshua's house. Ezra 8. 33. He is the son of Jeshua, a prince of Mizpah, who worked under Nehemiah in repairing Jerusalem's wall, may have been of the same family. Ne 3. 19. 6. One of the Levite supervisors of the temple rebuilding. As 3. 9. 7. One of the Levites reading and explaining the law to the people and taking the lead in worship, under Ezra's direction. Perhaps of the same house as No. 5. Ne 8. 7. 9. 4, 5. 8. A town in the southern part of Judah where some of the repatriated Jewish remnant dwelt. Its site is identified by some scholars as Tel Esawet El Yeshua, about 15 kilometers 9 mi of Beersheba. Ne 11. 25, 26 It may be the Shema of Joshua 15. 26, and possibly the Sheba of Joshua 19. 2. Jeshurun Jeshu middle dot run upright 1. An honorary title for Israel. In the Greek Septuagint Jeshurun becomes a term of affection, it being rendered beloved. The designation Jeshurun should have reminded Israel of its calling as Jehovah's covenant people and therefore of its obligation to remain upright. 33. 5, 26. Isla 44. 2 Deuteronomy 32. 15 The name Jeshurun is used ironically. Instead of living up to its name Jeshurun, Israel became intractable, forsook its maker, and despised its savior. Jezarmiel G middle dot semi middle dot El may God set appoint. God has set appointed. One of the Simeonite chieftains who, in King Hezekiah's day, extended their territory to the ear of the valley of Gedor. 1ch4. 24, 34-41. Jesse Jez shortened form of Ishia, meaning Jehovah makes forget. Or, possibly, a shortened form of Abishai. Father of King David of the tribe of Judah. Grandson of Ruth and Boaz, and a link in the genealogical line from Abraham to Jesus. Ru 4. 17, 22. Mount 1. 5, 6. Lu 3. 31, 32 Jesse fathered 8 sons, one of whom apparently died before producing any sons of his own, which may account for the omission of his name from the genealogies of Chronicles. 1 16. 10, 11. 17. 12. 1 ch.